Ahead on America This Week, United We Stand. As protesters calling for police reforms continue coast to coast,
God took the rejected stone and made him the cornerstone of a movement that's going to change the whole wide world.
George Floyd is laid to rest. Dr. Jason Nichols joins me to discuss the protests, cries for police reform, and justice.
We all have to be allies of justice. And I will tell you, when you're fighting for someone else's freedom, by extension, you're fighting for your own freedom.
Plus, as information regarding coronavirus transmission evolves, what precautions do Americans still need to take?
People appear to be the most contagious 2 days before they ever have symptoms.
Pandemic expert Dr. Dena Grayson is back to discuss COVID-19. Plus, America has worked to flatten the curve, but what about Americans who fear the reopening of society?
We can isolate the vulnerable populations and still protect the many without isolating the many to protect those vulnerable.
I talk with members of a new campaign working to help flatten the fear. That and so much more right now in America This Week. United We Stand. Welcome to America This Week, United We Stand. I'm Eric Bolling. Protests against racial injustice have taken place in every state across the country, all while the nation continues to grapple with a deadly pandemic. Cities across the country have been on edge this week, but as uncertain as things are, the tides will change. One thing is certain, we need to stand together right now more than ever. Joining me now is Maryland University lecturer and friend of mine, Dr. Jason Nichols. Jason, let's talk a little bit. You and I were on television recently. We were talking about Black Lives Matter and the protests, and they included, I would call it an Antifa member, as an agitator. And my problem is, and it remains, Jason, how do you get those people out of there? This guy literally is a white guy who said, we were part of the protest. We're going to go back and take what's ours. And they're part of the ones that are breaking glass and looting stores. How does that not mix the message, a legitimate message of Black Lives Matter? What do you say, Professor, to people like the Antifa groups who are getting involved in your protest?
Well, I don't like any protest to be hijacked by people who have a different cause or who try to make the cause much broader than the people who initiated the protest. I think, number one, with any protest, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's, for LGBT rights, whether it's for women, whether it's for Latinos and immigrants, I think the people at the center need to be the people who are most affected. So, when we're talking about the leadership and who sets the tone, it should be African-American people, in particular, the leaders who are setting up these kinds of protests, not, people who have their own purposes and their own devices. I think now, there are discussions about whether, certain types of rebellion are effective. As long as that's being led by people who are within the Black Lives Matter movement, then we can have that discussion. But people who are outside of the movement, who really may have their own purposes and are not really concerned directly with institutional racism and with white supremacy, then we need to root those people out.
But Jay, yeah. And you lump those two groups together. My concern, and I'll be 100% honest with you, I'm not racist. I think Black Lives Matter has a legitimate cause, a legitimate gripe here, and things should change in police forces around the country. But here's my problem. I'm a white person. Do I get involved? Do Black Lives Matter? Does an African-American professor want a white guy who kind of agrees with your cause? Do you want us part of your protest? I mean, it would seem that it opens up, it kind of, I guess, dilutes the efficacy of your message, does it not?
Well, I disagree, Eric. When you look at the civil rights movement, there were brave white guys who got involved. When you look at Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, Andrew Goodman and Mickey Schwerner were white men. And they were people who took this country forward. We have to think of ourselves collectively and understand that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If I saw something being unjust, that I thought was unjust to your community, whatever community that is, I would absolutely be right alongside of you. I wouldn't take over the movement or try to take leadership of the movement, but I would certainly be there as an ally and to support you. So I think people like you and you know, this is a question that I think is really good and really dear to me, because I just lost my best friend who was a professor of African American studies and was a white guy. You know, he cared about justice, he cared about equity for all, and he fought for it to the day he died. And so for me, I think we all have to be allies of justice. And I will tell you, when you're fighting for someone else's freedom, by extension, you're fighting for your own freedom. And that's what needs to be understood. That's what was in the famous Nehemiah poem, where it's first they came for the Jews and the communists, and then they came for me. And there was no one left to speak up. So I think it's important that we all get involved for things that are right. Just don't try to hijack it and take it over for your own purposes.
Okay, Jason, I just have about a minute or so left. You know, this defund the police. Defund police means something different to just about to every person I speak to. I clearly don't think everyone means take police out of communities. That would just be anarchy. What does it mean to you, Professor, when you hear defund police?
So when I hear defund police, I think it means to reallocate resources to things that actually prevent crime. We know that some crime comes from homelessness. It comes from poverty. And I think one of the things that we've seen, and some police officers actually support this, it's because they think of policemen being overburdened and trying to solve society's problem. Policing should be a last resort to crime, not the first resort. So, for example, in LA, they are going to take $150 million away from police, but that still would represent, police would still get over 50% of their budget. So I think, you know, defunding the police is actually in some ways going to benefit police departments and police officers themselves.
Yeah, and we did notice, while they're talking about taking $150 million from police in L.A., L.A. County had a spike of 250% of a murder rate, jumping 250%. Jason, I got to go. Here's a thought that I've presented to you and to others. Quick thought on the backside of this. How about we push communities, law enforcement communities, officers, to have the similar makeup, the similar demographic that the community they represent? So if it's an African-American community that's 30% black, how about 30% of the police force is black? Because right now, African Americans underrepresent the community they protect in law enforcement. Quick thought.
Yeah, the only thing about that, number one, you get into some dicey areas in terms of, you know, affirmative action. And I also think that doesn't always make a difference. We've seen that some uses of force, because this is institutionalized, it's not about individual hatred and bias.
Gotcha.
A lot of times, that actually, you know, doesn't work.
Yeah, and yeah, I got you. It doesn't matter what the race of the officer is. It's the fact that there's an institutional racial bias in your words and your thoughts. Jason, I'm going to say thank you again. Appreciate your time, Jason Nichols.
Anytime, Eric.
To wear or not to wear? Pandemic expert Dr. Dena Grayson weighs the good and bad when it comes to masks. Next.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand, Americans.
United we stand.
We stand, Americans.
United we stand.
Many Americans are weighing the pros and cons of wearing a mask in public places. Those against them say they irritate the skin and make breathing difficult. Others say it's an important way to help reduce the spread of the virus. But what are the medical reasons not to wear a mask? Medical reporter Liz Bonis from our Sinclair station WKRC helps weigh the benefits versus the risks when it comes to covering up.
From protesters in crowds around the country to those walking around in grocery stores and other businesses. When it comes to wearing masks, the CDC does suggest we all wear at least a cloth covering when interacting with other people. But from live events where you ask questions online to our Sinclair online Corona Alert Desk.
We know there's been some misinformation about masks, and some people are publishing misinformation to try to discourage people from wearing masks.
Dr. John Mendelson is a facial plastic surgeon and an ear, nose, and throat specialist. His team required to wear them while in close contact with the public. So I keep getting these reports of people very concerned that wearing the mask will be damaging to their skin, and then perhaps they can't breathe and it causes other health problems. Where's that coming from?
I think there are a couple of things. I think number one, I think physically, if you watch people, our masks are being moved on and off, so there's some friction, which is creating some issues with with our skin. The second issue is, depending on the material that the mask is made out of, there are some sensitivities, as we all know and have. The third thing, I think the biggest thing, is probably people who are unfamiliar are breathing through those masks, and we are changing some of the characteristics of the skin.
Those changing characteristics are often referred to as maskne rather than acne.
The sebum, the oil production, therefore we're changing the pH, and we are seeing people break out. Commonly, we're seeing these little tiny white bumps along those areas.
As for treatment?
We're managing acne as we would otherwise.
As for the breathing concern, Wendy Flynn is their licensed managing esthetician.
She's wearing a mask for her procedures, and she has difficulty breathing, and so do asthmatics. And it's actually could be unsafe for some of those people. They have difficulty breathing with the change in their environment. So it is a real thing, and it's a real thing to consider in terms of people with underlying medical histories.
Dr. Mendelson says everything is benefit versus risk, not the other way around. In some cases, prolonged contact has to be balanced with your need for a real breath of fresh air. For America This Week, I'm medical reporter Liz Bonis.
I want to say thank you to WKRC and Liz Bonis for that story. Joining me now is pandemic expert Dr. Dena Grayson. Doctor, thanks for joining us again. I want to talk to you a little bit. What do you think about the pros and cons of social distancing, wearing masks, et cetera? We've been all over the board. Dr. Fauci, frankly, changed his tune on this very show. What's the latest?
Well, Eric, the evidence strongly suggests that wearing masks reduces transmission of this virus. Now, we don't know by how much. I think a lot of that depends on the environment you're in. We know that when people are close together, that wearing a mask, certainly it's going to decrease the number of respiratory particles that you're spraying out onto your unsuspecting friends and loved ones. So the strong advice is to wear a mask. And actually, some experts think that even just mask wearing alone would be enough to avoid a fair number of the lockdowns.
Yeah, it just never made sense that wearing a mask wasn't important. Then it became look, every doctor, every nurse in the hospital, every physician wears a mask for a reason. And I don't buy that stuff where you say people wear masks so they don't spread it. I think people wear masks so they don't catch it. Doctor, the WHO this week has been all over the board, first saying that it was difficult to transmit the virus, COVID-19, when you're asymptomatic. They came back and said, well, or Fauci came back and the WHO said, well, maybe that's not exactly the case. If you're pre-symptomatic, can you just clear up asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic? How difficult is it to spread the virus?
Well, sure. So asymptomatic, what is meant by that are people that don't have symptoms and never get symptoms. So these are sort of asymptomatic carriers of the virus. Now, there have been studies that show that even people that have no symptoms and never get symptoms, they're still shedding the same amount of virus as those that have symptoms. I mean, they're spraying out, into the air the same number of viruses. Now, pre-symptomatic, what that means is these are people that currently have no symptoms, but eventually will get symptoms. And right now, what we know about this virus is it looks like people are the most...
Like, how do you know, Doc? How do you distinguish? How do you know if you're going to be, right now I'm asymptomatic, but that just may be a pre-symptomatic case?
Well, that's a great point, Eric. And that's why wearing masks is so important. It really does help prevent you from spreading the virus to others. And what we know is that people appear to be the most contagious 2 days before they ever have symptoms. That's in that pre-symptomatic period. And that's when they're actually most contagious. And that's why just checking for fever and things like that isn't enough. So that's why really the strong recommendation is everyone wear a mask, somewhat to protect yourself. But, honestly, the reason why doctors and nurses wear masks in the operating room is not to protect themselves, it's to protect patients because, you're spreading germs via, just breathing.
Okay. Maybe. I'm not a doctor.
Definitely.
I just play
Come
with
on,
TV. Doctor, so many people asking, when can we go back to the family? When can the family go back to nursing homes? We've been, we're so tired of seeing the sad pictures of people waving to family members behind glass. When can we go back in?
Oh, gosh, Eric, this is, I think, one of the most heartbreaking, tragic parts of this. I have older loved ones, and my stepdad actually is turning 90 years old this summer. And, I won't be seeing him in person, and it's heartbreaking. And I think all of us have many of us have this heartache. And the reality is, until we know that somebody is immune, can't spread that virus, we really should be avoiding visiting our loved ones in nursing homes. So I think we're looking at widespread immunity, a vaccine, somebody who's had the virus has antibodies. Perhaps that's safe enough for them to go visit. But until then, it's really a sad situation.
Yeah, you're talking probably a better part of another year or so if that's the case. Doctor, before we go, you had once said that you thought there was a 100% chance that we're going to have to shelter in place again, lock down the economy, shelter in place again. Mm-hmm. Are you still on that, or is that now that we have the benefit of hindsight and a lot more knowledge? Do you think that's still the case? Where are we in a 0 to 100% chance that we're going to need this again when the virus comes back around in the fall and winter?
Eric, I have not moved on this. It's 100%. I mean, right now, what we're starting to see in 18 states currently, and it's June, it's summer, it's not flu season, it's not coronavirus season. We're seeing a second peak in the first wave. And in certain states, we're actually seeing hospitals getting near or at, over capacity, which is very, very concerning. So states like Arkansas, Arizona, Alabama, even Texas is seeing this huge surge in cases. Yep. So I really am concerned for next fall and winter as we head in, averaging over 20,000 new cases a day and nearly 1,000 Americans currently dying each day of this deadly virus.
Another scary and dire prediction, but we always love her. Dr. Dena Grayson, thank you very much for your time. Coming up on America This Week, United We Stand. As we flatten the curve and states lift stay-at-home orders, how do we flatten the fear Americans have about re-engaging with society? But first, as you know by now, you have a voice on this show and a voice with me. Each week, hundreds of calls flood into my toll-free number, 888-601-0032. Last week, you were very fired up about the protests. Thousands called, many very upset.
Well, President Trump wanted to build a wall, and now he built a wall right around the White House, his own place.
I see your program, and I'm so thankful that you show both sides of a question. You call out people who say wrong things and tell them why it's wrong. Or if they misstate the truth, you call that out.
I listen to every single call. I play a few here so the whole country can hear you. I'm developing a mass-produced podcast which will highlight your voice, and the goal is always for you to be heard. I hear you, and I want them to hear you. 888-601-0032 or ericbolling.com, all free, all the time.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand American strong.
United we stand.
We stand American strong.
City by city, state by state.
As states begin to reopen, some Americans may be uneasy about re-engaging in society. The Flatten the Fear campaign has been launched by the Job Creators Network to help alleviate that concern. Joining me now is Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation, and Dr. C.L. Gray, a board-certified physician and founder of Physicians for Reform. I'll start with you, Dr. Gray, if I may. I want to go to the medical part of this first. A lot of people are fearful. We saw things start to open up. We have seen some spikes in some states post-opening up. Is that not a fear for you?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at those numbers this morning. It's rather fascinating because what we're seeing is a sort of a conflation between number of new cases, which we would expect with increased testing, and daily deaths. Take Texas, for example. A month ago, May 10th, there were about 1,200 new cases a day. On June 10th, this bumped about 1,700. That's a 40% increase in the number of new cases, which we would expect with increased testing. However, over that same period of time, death rate has dropped from 35 to 21 daily, which is a 40% decrease in the number of deaths. So we would expect these spikes as we increase testing.
So doctor, can I just follow up? What do you attribute that increased number of cases but decreased number of deaths? Why has it become less deadly? Is it the weather? Is it treatments? What is it?
Well, the decreased deaths, it may be sort of the flattening the curve, which takes us to flattening the fear. Because we see this in multiple states. We see this trend nationally, too, where the death rate is actually decreasing. And it's interesting, we can maybe get to that with a follow-up question to identify who it is that's at risk.
All right, Elaine, tell us, Flattening the Fear campaign that you're part of and Dr. references. What's your goal? What's the message you want to tell the American people right now?
Thanks for having me on, Eric. The goal of that the Job Creators Network is trying to achieve here is to flatten the fear. I mean, Americans did a great job. We shut down the economy, and the reason why we did that was to make sure that our hospitals didn't become overwhelmed. And we achieved that goal, but unfortunately, we've got a situation where people are still afraid to come out of their homes. And so what we want to do with Flatten the Fear is put microphones in front of doctors like Dr. Gray across the country who are experts on these issues so that they can talk about the holistic approach of what these extended shutdowns are doing. People are missing preventative care treatments. They're missing diagnostic tests. Cancer screenings. We're seeing increases in alcohol use, drug use, physical abuse. And so there's a holistic approach to look at this and to identify where those high-risk populations are, because we know now that we can isolate the vulnerable populations and still protect the many without isolating the many to protect those vulnerable populations.
You know, and I'll start with you, Elaine. Tell us what. So for me, it seems like the governors and even more micro, the mayors of these towns that are continuing to slow walk the reopen. I'm thinking of Washington D.C. I'm thinking of some other places in the Northeast. Is it time for them to just say, okay, we've got a handle on this. Our hospitals aren't going to be overwhelmed. Let's just open up. Let's just push right forward to phase 3. Let's call it, or reopen, fully reopen. Is that the message?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm in Florida, so Governor DeSantis has been extremely, he's done a fantastic job, not only with having to deal with, when we had to shut down the economy, but in reopening the economy. And even though we're at 100% capacity on restaurants, gyms are open, bars are even open, we've got areas in Florida where mayors and local governments are still not allowing, say, bars to be open. And so when you look at the overall numbers in the country, we've got to put it in context. Half of the counties in the country have had zero deaths, zero COVID deaths. And 43% of all COVID deaths are in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. So we have to protect the older population and those with underlying, health conditions. But only 7% of people under the age of 55 have died.
I agree and completely agree. Down here in South Carolina, and they went from a 75% open rate in Restaurants back to a 50%. I just don't get it. It's time to go. We ran out of time. Elaine Parker to say thank you very much. And again, Dr. Gray, we appreciate your time and totally agree with you guys. Time to flatten the fear, reopen the economy, darn it. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Make sure you never miss a minute of America This Week or United We Stand. Be sure to set your DVR so you can watch our show at any time. Check out when we air in your city by going to facebook.com/AmericaBowling, all one word. We have a complete list at the top of the page, city by city.
United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand America.
United we stand.
We stand America.
United we stand. United we stand, we never fall. This perilous fight, it takes one and all. Everyone stands, American strong. Strength by one equals strength by all. American values, American pride. Your neighbor needs you, each person, each time.
We stand America.
United we stand.
We stand America.
United we stand.
Thank you for watching America This Week, United We Stand. Tonight, we leave you with images from the funeral of George Floyd, whose death has sparked ongoing worldwide protests. Family, friends, and the world watched and mourned this week for a life that was tragically cut too short. Good night, everybody.